So welcome to today's session called The Missing Piece of Cancer Care, which is considering mental health. And I know for many of us, when we say the word mental health, you're like, oh, mental health. Yes, I know it's important, but the word mental can be quite activating for many of us. No matter which country or place you're from, many of us have a history of complexity with that word, where we've grown up in cultures and communities where we haven't talked about emotions or used the word mental health. So really, we're talking about emotional health, those inner thoughts and feelings of what's happening inside of someone who has been touched by cancer. And when I say touched by cancer, we're going to be speaking about a broad spectrum of topics today. That means if you've had a close call or scare when it comes to cancer, whether that's precancerous cells or a period of time of uncertainty of not knowing whether you had cancer, that also includes if it was a colleague, a loved one, friend, or family where you're in that in-between period of not knowing. This talk will be applicable for that, but also if you've been diagnosed and you are living with cancer, or you have a loved one who's currently living with cancer, today's talk is also relevant for you. If you are a survivor of cancer, we'll also be talking about what is relevant for you. And if you are a caregiver of someone who's anywhere on that spectrum, this talk is also for you as well. So my name is Farah, and I am a counselor that is working at the Lighthouse. I've been in Dubai for almost 8 years now, and I originally am from Michigan, Pakistani American, and I have a special expertise, particularly in grief and trauma and health psychology. So when it comes to cancer care or living with chronic illness, this is one of my passions, and it always has been. So I'll be talking to you about what do we want to consider? Like, what are some common themes when it comes to considering mental health, or if I say inner world, emotional health, well-being, it all means the same thing. What are some things I want you to be aware of? We'll also look at, I like to think of it as we'll do some mapping together, which is what's common to be feeling. I don't like the word normal, I'll say common, but when you are having a close call or you're living with a diagnosis, if you're a survivor, anywhere on that spectrum, what's normal to be feeling? Okay, so we'll do some mapping together. We'll talk specifically about what can be triggers. We'll talk a little bit about the role of grief when it comes to kind of mapping the psychological terrain of being touched by cancer in some way. I'll speak about how to take care of yourself, some really practical things and things you want to avoid and tend to. This is also true if you're a caregiver, right? Caregiver, or even just there's someone you care for that is somewhere on this cancer journey. This is also relevant for you. And then at the very end, I'll speak about how do I support someone? Like, what are some things that I should not be saying and that are more supportive things to say? So today's session will also be recorded, so it will be emailed to you. And I hope that we should have a bit of time, excuse me, at the end of today's talk where if you'd like to share with me kind of what you're thinking, feeling, any reflections that you have, you can do that towards the end of today's talk as well, okay? So I've already covered this, what we're doing. So we'll do a bit of a true or false. So the first one is cancer is only a physical illness, not a mental health concern. You just kind of think to yourself, true or false. And that is false. It absolutely, you can imagine that when someone is anywhere on that spectrum, it is a massive strain on our thoughts, our feelings, our way of operating. It is a huge risk factor for poor mental health. And remember, your mind and your body are eternally married. What impacts one impacts the other. These things are not separate. So if there's something happening in the body, then it is absolutely impacting the health of your brain or your mental health as well. Okay. So it's normal for someone living with cancer to be depressed. That is false, and it is a very dangerous myth, actually. It is not normal to be feeling chronically depressed, low, empty, hopeless, helpless, to be chronically agitated, angry, or low, to say, I just don't know what the meaning of life is, or I don't want to continue going on. These symptoms of depression are not normal characteristic feelings when it comes to being anywhere on that spectrum when it comes to cancer. And if you and yourself or in a loved one find there are chronic feelings of just a low, flat mood or intense hopelessness, or saying, I just don't enjoy anything. The things that you used to love or they used to love, you're saying they just, that food, that place, that memory, that activity, you're saying it just doesn't bring joy anymore, which is a core trait of depression. That is not a normal part of being on the cancer journey. And it's actually a really dangerous myth, right? Because oftentimes when someone we care for is on that cancer journey, we think, oh yeah, of course they're depressed. I would feel sad if I were going through that. Now, it's okay to have moments of feeling sad, but if you're feeling that way most days for more than 2 weeks, it is a warning sign that it could be something more serious, okay? So once cancer treatment is over, emotional stress disappears. This is also false, right? That the emotional turmoil and stress on our mind, on our emotional health, isn't over once treatment is over. For so many, when we think of survivorship, there can be post-traumatic stress disorder. There's higher risk of depression and anxiety after treatment is over, because so many aspects of a person's life have, while there can be relief that one milestone is over and you're moving into survivorship and recovery. There's this whole new terrain that arrives, which is, wow, I feel kind of anxious about what if it comes back? Or there can be so much health anxiety or changes in one's body. I want you to think of survivorship also as, you know, it isn't until a soldier comes home from war that you begin to see post-traumatic stress, to see how has this actually impacted me. And that is also true with survivorship. And it is actually quite a high risk time that someone may start struggling, or you may notice different changes in one's kind of inner terrain. Okay, so it's not that treatment's over, now there's no difficult emotions, right? Okay, so this fourth one is untreated depression can worsen pain symptoms related to cancer. Okay, that is true. Okay, we do see a correlation between untreated actually depression and anxiety can worsen physical pain symptoms and make them more difficult to bear, which is a pretty alarming finding. Adherence to treatment is often compromised when there's mental health concerns. That is true. So we do see that individuals living with depression, anxiety, even addiction, they're less likely to take medication or come to appointments on time or do the follow-up care that's necessary, because they may just be feeling there's already the physical level of exhaustion from side effects that can be there, but there can be an added weight of exhaustion and pain that they're struggling with things like depression or anxiety. So it can mean that we do see that individuals living with untreated depression can often live shorter lives than individuals living with cancer and no depression, which is quite alarming. Okay. And so that untreated mental health concerns can shorten cancer patients' lives. That is true. Survivors are no longer at risk of struggling with their mental health. I've already talked about that. That is false. It is actually quite a high risk time. There's a huge adjustment process going on. And the last one is all individuals living with cancer have the same emotional response. That is absolutely not true, okay? each person's response is as unique as their fingerprint. And we're going to do some mapping on like what are those common responses, but no one person is going to respond the same. Okay, it'll be very different. All right. So who are we talking about? When I say the spectrum of cancer, really I'm talking about if you've had a scare or a close call, if a loved one received a diagnosis or you have, whether you are living with cancer, whether you're a survivor or a caregiver, everything that I'm speaking about is relevant to you. So I may use different kind of points in the journey, but I'm talking about all of you who may be impacted, no matter where you are. Okay. So as I do this mapping of what's common to be feeling, I want you to know for each of us, it's going to be really different. However, we can see certain clusters of responses. Okay. So you don't need to remember all of this, but this is something called polyvagal theory. And for myself and others, it can be so helpful to understand, like, where am I? Okay. So imagine you are waiting for a diagnosis or you're kind of somewhere in the cancer journey. One place where we can feel is a sense of calm, groundedness. These are moments of optimism or feeling like I'm going to be okay or I can get through this. There are moments when you feel like you're curious. You're actually taking in what the doctor is saying. You may feel really present with yourself, with your work, with the people in your life. This is when our nervous system is actually feeling quite safe and grounded. And no matter where you are in this journey, we can have moments like that, okay? And if you have questions, I want you to just save them towards the end. This is the place we want to be, okay? Now, there can be other moments of high stress. Let's say you are waiting for scan results, right, to see how effective was the treatment or, where are we at, which can be a trigger, right? It can be a moment of great activation. And you may see something called hyperarousal. Okay. And this is when the body goes into a fight or flight state. And these are moments of great activation. Okay. Maybe you notice a symptom in yourself or in a loved one, you're thinking, oh my gosh, is it back? Or what is that normal to feel? And we can get triggered by something, right? And a cluster of a response can be this fight or flight, which is heart racing, feeling really anxious, afraid, irritable, angry. There can be those racing thoughts. The mind may be jumping to the worst case scenario. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if it's this? And there's a lot of activation. I like to think of this activation as a home alarm system that has become very sensitive. And I say the word sensitive carefully because it can be a misused gendered word, right? But what I mean by sensitive is like a sensor that becomes overactivated and you just walk past it and it starts going off like something's not right, something bad's going to happen, okay? Now, in this state, there's a feeling of you may be getting a lot of things done, and researching and connecting, and there's a lot of activation. Now, there's another response that can happen when a trigger is present in your journey, and we call this a dorsal vagal response, and that is a freeze response. Okay. Now, a very terrified nervous system is a frozen nervous system, right? And this can be you or the individual is feeling completely numb, detached, feeling nothing at all, feeling really empty, low, shut down. And when you're speaking to them, it may feel like they're not really reacting at all. And oftentimes we mistake a freeze response for a calm, grounded, they're doing okay, wow, they're taking it really well. Now, not everyone who is presenting in that way may actually be frozen. They may be in a ventral vagal and actually feeling calm and okay in that moment. That may be true. However, it can often be an absolute freeze response. And this is oftentimes where you hear people say, I didn't hear anything the doctor said. Like, maybe someone should have come with me. Like, I was not there, even though I wasn't crying or saying anything. So you do want to be curious that when you're feeling nothing at all, that paralysis. You may be in a freeze response, and it is a very terrified nervous system. This is so important for you to check in with yourself, but also if you're a caregiver or you work with cancer in some way. Just because someone is not looking very activated or tearful, that doesn't mean that they're actually present and taking in everything that's there for you. So I want you to be curious in your journey when there are those stressful moments that arrive, whatever that may look like, is when you do get triggered, where are you? Are you feeling a lot of activation or are you feeling quite frozen? And depending on what you're feeling, I'll recommend some different strategies to ideally get you back into the green zone. And the green zone is where you're saying, wow, there's a lot here. This is really difficult. And I'm also feeling like I can hear what you're saying. I'm feeling present. I'm feeling curious. I can think and hear more clearly. Okay. And that's where we want to get back to. Right. So I'm going to go a little bit deeper and talk about also different common feelings that may come up on the journey. And remember, when you're thinking about these responses or reactions, they often come in unexpected waves, right? There can be moments in the journey as you're waiting for results or you're going through where you're like, I feel okay. And then there can be waves of feeling a lot of guilt, right? Or should I have done that? Should I not have done that? Should I have made different lifestyle choices? Or did I go with the right doctor? There can be lots of questions and guilt that may come up in waves. Okay. There may be a sense of survivor's guilt that you may be experiencing. This is especially true if you've lost someone to cancer and saying, like, why do some people recover and others do not? There can be a sense of shame. There may be waves of feeling defective or something's wrong with me. There can be a great sense of helplessness, especially I have so many people say to me, like, when you're trying to make the best treatment decisions and saying, like, I'm not a doctor, I haven't studied this for years, there's so much information, am I making the right decision or not? There can be a lot of anxiety, helplessness, confusion, there can be waves of hopelessness, right? So you can be feeling strong and optimistic and also feeling terrified and hopeless. And it can come in those waves. Because remember, when we think about emotional health or just how our emotions work, we're typically never just feeling one emotion, right? You can be you can be showing up for someone that you love and feeling so hopeful and also terrified. Right? You can be feeling afraid and also be feeling strong, going into treatments and saying, I feel really, ready and I feel optimistic, and also be feeling really uncomfortable or afraid. You can be feeling really supported, but also be feeling very lonely at the same time. We can hold these conflicting emotions, very common. Okay. There may be waves of disbelief, like, I can't believe, like, how am I here? There can be, and remember, this word of acceptance is quite complicated. There can be moments where you're like, okay, this is real, this is happening, I'm taking action. And then also there can be waves of, I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe this is happening. Is this real? And that doesn't mean that you haven't accepted it, right? It's the nature of our health changing this way. And when people say cancer, the first response or the feeling often is death. Now, we know that's not actually true, but that can be the emotional experience you may have or your loved ones may. And there can be moments of great disbelief, feeling betrayed, whether that's spiritually or by people in your life or by systems in your life. And when you think of the emotion of overwhelm, there's just so many different emotions all at once. Now, when we're experiencing a lot of emotional stress, there can also be cognitive is just a fancy way for our thinking, like those stream of thoughts we have. You may feel like it's a bit harder to concentrate, right? And I know so many people will say to me, a lot of that can be side effects of treatment and medication as well. And we want to absolutely take that into consideration. And I would add, this is also a part of the emotional stress, right? Especially during triggering times where you're waiting for something or you're waiting for a result or you're managing pain symptoms that are here. You're like, oh, I'm really struggling to be present right now. You can have moments of feeling a bit more disoriented, like, where am I? What just happened? And I have so many people say this happens often at appointments, right? Or leading up or sitting in the waiting room. And it's like, where am I? What time is it? It's just, you feel a little bit disconnected from your environment. You may notice there may be more forgetfulness, okay? And a lot of emotional pain, if not all of it, it's not just in our thoughts where we think I'm sad, it's held in the body. So there may be a heaviness on the chest, feeling like this is a lot, or tension in your throat. For many people, you think of our fight or flight response, it's connected to our neck, our shoulders here, jaw, right? There may be a lot of tension. Our jaw is connected to our hip. There may be a lot of stress held there. Um, Headaches, aches, and pains in the body are connected to our stress response as well. It can be hard to sleep. You can be racing thoughts. You may notice that you're avoiding people. Okay. And you may notice that places now feel triggering. I'll often have people say, when I just drive anywhere near the hospital or I go near a related appointment, I feel so many memories and emotions that come with that, right? So there may be avoidance that you're experiencing, or we talk about that post-traumatic stress as well. Oftentimes, we don't even realize the impact, where there may be certain scents, certain sounds, certain songs where you're saying, wow, that immediately reminds me of that time. Okay. There may be more numbing, and numbing will be, "Oh, I just can't deal with this. I'm gonna spend more time on my phone, or I'm eating more, drinking more, smoking more." There may be more of those behaviors to try and cope with the emotional stress that's here. And during high stress moments of the journey, you may also find there can be more sensitivity towards noise or light, or it can feel quite painful. Okay. And for so many people, it can be really hard to relate to others, especially others who may not really understand what it's like to be touched by cancer or be on that journey, and say, I don't know if you get what I'm going through. And there can be and I didn't say on here, but there can be a lot of loneliness as well, feeling quite isolated or just not wanting to see people. Okay. And remember, it can all come in waves. Some of these things you may say, no, I didn't feel that, but you want to pick and choose what resonates with you. There can be a lot of spiritual angst that arrives. For some, it may be leaning into faith or religion, and there will often be other moments where you're saying, why does this happen? How do I make sense of this? Why does this happen to good people or to children or to young people? So there can be a lot of existential questioning that is also, it doesn't mean you're a bad person, right? It is all part of the process where you're saying, I'm trying to understand why. How do I make meaning of this? And that can be quite taxing, right? It's not every day in your life where you may be reevaluating and re-questioning all of these things. Okay. And I also want you to know many people, and I see this a lot, will often have a very delayed reaction. And, especially in the journey, you may have certain people or moments where you're like, okay, I'm researching everything and I'm going to all my appointments, and they can become very hyper vigilant, right? Very action orientated. And that's not a bad or a good thing. It's just the way that person may be coping. And oftentimes you will find that there can be quite a delayed reaction, right? And that can be months later where we may notice any of those difficult feelings that we've described as well. And this is again the person we think, wow, they're so strong. They're like really taking charge of what's here, their treatment, their care, their self-care. And that's great. I trust that. And that is how they're coping. And I would also say, remember, it's a process, right? So you may find some of those difficult emotions, whether it's in mind, thinking, body, that begin to come up months later or weeks later. So just want to hold that in mind. Okay. So we just did a little bit of mapping together. We looked at what are some of those common clusters of responses, no matter where you are in your journey, what that may look like. And so that I really want you to be curious about, what has it looked like for you? What have you noticed in your thinking, in your body, when those unexpected waves came? How, how did it impact you? Okay. And I hope you know that if you're like, wow, I felt so okay, and then I was like unexpectedly anxious, and then I couldn't really sleep, or I want you to know that those responses when you are on a journey that can be quite traumatic, it doesn't mean that you're crazy or you're not strong or you're weak or you're not coping, that can be a very understandable part of the journey. Now, I will also speak about a bit later, but actually I'll just say it now, is if at any point in your journey you're saying, I'm really struggling to function, I'm experiencing intense anxiety and panic attacks, or I'm questioning life and living, or I'm having suicidal thoughts, or you're struggling because there's more addictive behavior where you're using more and more substances or alcohol or certain behaviors that are harmful to you to cope, that is not a healthy response. That would be a harmful response, right? And I say not healthy, but no judgment, right? But that would be really concerning, where I'd say we must get a professional involved. Do not go at it alone, okay? Now, before I get to the how to take care of yourself as well, and we're doing good on time, I want to talk about the role of grief, which is really entangled with living with cancer on this journey. And grief is not just death, right? That's not what grief is related to. Grief is related to loss. And with cancer, whether it is a close call, living with it, survivorship, or caregiving, there can be the loss of the dream of what you thought things would look like or you hoped for. And there's many things that are grieved. Health, okay, normalcy in life, routine, how you felt in your body. Um, you can imagine that we tend to walk around with a bit of a bubble, not in a naive way, but there's a sense of I'm safe. Like we're moving through life and I'm pretty safe. And when a cancer diagnosis comes or you're touched by cancer, it's like this breaks or it becomes more porous and it feels like, well, if this could happen, maybe other bad things could happen too. So there can be a loss of feeling safe. For many people, there's a loss of feeling safe in one's own body. Okay. And that is a huge shift. Trust in the body. There can be a loss of feeling in control. There may be loss in relationships, or just certain people may not show up for you or empathize. Some may become very close. There may be a change in financial security, as treatment can be quite expensive. So there's a loss that happens, right? And people will say, I'm grieving who I used to be before. I've had so many people say to me, even after, many people when they're living with cancer, they'll often have these milestones like, okay, just get through this treatment or just get to recovery. And there will be these milestones that are very important. And then oftentimes when they're in recovery, they'll say, I thought I wouldn't struggle emotionally at this point, that it would be such a win and celebration. And they'll say things like, but I'm noticing I'm really anxious about my health, that I often fear, what if it comes back? Or they'll notice changes in their personality where they'll say, I'm really hypervigilant when it comes to certain subtle signs in my loved one or in my children. Like, was that serious or was that not? Or should we go to the doctor? Or should we not? And that can come with a lot of loss. Like, this isn't who I was before. So there's those changes in identity that also come. You may say, like, wow, before this, when I did test results, I didn't feel anxious at all. And so there can be that loss. There may be changes in your body as a result of the cancer, and that there can be loss that comes with that. Now, the most defining characteristic of grief is that it comes in unexpected waves, right? And so that it's very common. I'll often say it's like having your back to the ocean and never knowing when those waves may come. So let me give you an example. So let's say that you are, I'm thinking of what can be a grief trigger and a very common example. So imagine someone is saying, Perhaps there's been a mastectomy that's been done, and they're saying, wow, I'm putting this dress on and my body looks quite different. That may be a trigger, and a wave of grief may come. And that sadness, maybe I wish things were different, or I miss how I used to look or how I used to feel. That would be a wave of grief that came. Okay. Another example may be, and very common triggers are going to be around special occasions, birthdays, anniversaries of treatment. A trigger may be a normal doctor's appointment, and you're saying, I feel really activated, or I feel really sad. I'm thinking about everything that I've been through, or there may be a wave of anxiety. Okay. Sometimes those grief triggers are not just emotional, it can also be very, very physical that come as well. Okay. And I'm curious to know more about what this has looked like for you. So when I say trigger, I want you to be curious about what this could be, right? A trigger is going to be a very strong emotional response. So for example, I'll often have people say to me, I look at families that are untouched by illness, and the trigger can be jealousy, envy, and then shame. And they'll say, like, I never used to be this person before. I don't wish bad on this person, but it feels so unfair that my family has been through what it has, and other people have no idea, right? And then there can be even some shame and guilt for feeling that way. And again, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. That can be a common response, but a trigger is strong. It feels like you've entered a bit of a trap door in your mind. Okay. And it can feel hard to regulate yourself and feel like, I feel like me. You know, when you think about that green ventral vagal where you're like open, curious, you're taking in information, sometimes even time and space can feel a bit blurred. Now, if we like, let's say, a colleague says something and you're like, that was so annoying, like you just don't get it, but you're fine and you're concentrating and you're moving about your day, that's not a trigger, right? Triggers are a lot stronger than that. And something that you can do, or that I recommend that is really helpful with your mental health, is be curious about what your unique triggers are. These are moments that are incredibly difficult, whether it is doctor's appointments, it may be a certain person in your life that makes comments that are not helpful, or says, you should just do this, or you should just do that. Be curious about what tends to trigger that strong emotional response. Is it when you're looking at your body? Is it when you're planning finances? Is it when other people speak about their health? Is it when you notice a certain symptom in your body? Be curious about what triggers you, because when I mention regulation strategies, you really need to be deliberate about tending to triggers, because a trigger is the equivalent of um, like a physical pain flare up, right? So if my wrist was really hurting, then I know I have to tend to that. Okay. Now I'm going to get to the how to care for you very shortly, like 5 minutes. I want to talk about the difference between healthy sadness, like a healthy wave that I've spoken about, or something more serious, which can actually be depression. Okay. So we all feel sad. And on the cancer journey, there will be waves and moments of sadness. Absolutely. Usually, sadness is going to last a few minutes, a few hours, but you will still be enjoying some things in your life. Okay. So whether that's spending time with your children or painting or watching something, you're like, oh, I liked that. That was good. And with cancer care, you can find that there's still, in the hope of getting better, can still bring joy. Like, when this is over, we're going to travel there or eat this or do this. Even that thought can bring joy. Whereas with depression, even the thought of it, nothing, doesn't bring joy, doesn't bring a sense of pleasure, which is a core sign of depression. And it's not just sad or tearful. Depression is, I feel nothing. I feel empty. I feel detached. And it can be sad, angry. And you're going to see that it's for most days, right? Most days for at least 2 weeks. Okay. Now, it's most days at least 2 weeks. Now, we know that the average adult typically waits 12 years before ever seeking professional support for depression. So I say to you 2 weeks because that's from our diagnostic manual, but usually it's going to be, it's been a month of me feeling this way or longer. You never ever see suicidal thoughts or behaviors with healthy sadness. Okay. So if someone's saying, most days of the weeks they're feeling like, what's the point of even going on? What's the point of going to these appointments anymore? I just don't see the point. I just don't want to live anymore. And they're feeling that way most days of the week. And maybe you're seeing that they're not adhering to their treatment anymore. These are signs of depression and help is available. Okay. There may be a lot of shame. They may be blaming themselves a lot or feeling a lot of guilt towards themselves in the situation. These are all indications of depression. Okay. There is treatment. And remember, this is not a normal part of cancer care. And oftentimes I see this in the health system and families where someone who's living with cancer will say, just what's the point? And we think, well, yeah, maybe that's just normal. Absolutely not. And not treating the depression can worsen their kind of fighting chance of healing through it. Okay. Now, we're also going to look at, well, waves of worry can be common and absolutely understandable. Well, what's the difference between healthy worry related to the cancer journey or more clinical anxiety? So, when you think about clinical anxiety, it's going to be, I want you to think of that. That fight or flight that we spoke about, that hypervigilance, right? I want you to imagine that most days of the week, the level of fear you feel does not match the situation. Okay. And that fear. So imagine you are somewhere on the cancer journey and you just wake up most days with a sense of dread. Okay. And that sense of panic. It may be triggered by a situation, but it may not be. And that panic that you're feeling or fear may be interrupting your ability to work, to just function and get out of bed and take care of chores in life. It may be impacting your relationships, or it may be impacting your physical symptoms or your health. Okay. Because anxiety can be incredibly physical. There can be, now, again, this can really be almost normalized with cancer care. Well, people will say, well, isn't it normal for the person to feel anxious? Because what if the treatment doesn't work, or what happens? Or that is absolutely understandable that there is going to be worry, right? Now, if I'm in that state of worry where my mind is racing most days, most hours, okay, I would be concerned. And if I'm saying I'm struggling to function, I'm struggling to be present, I'm struggling to have moments where I'm connecting with myself or people in my life, or this worry is giving me digestive issues, or I'm having panic attacks, that is not an aspect of normal worry related to cancer. Okay. Now, clinical anxiety is most days feel like difficult days. It's that excessive worry. And remember that worry is not just emotional, it's also in the body, right? It's like pounding heart, muscles are tense, stomach may be upset, the mind is racing and chronically jumping to the worst case scenario. And very similar to depression, there may also be suicidal thoughts or feelings. Okay, there may be panic attacks, right? That can present, they kind of look like a heart attack actually, right? And panic attack is different from really high anxiety. Both are painful, but panic attack comes on suddenly, difficulty breathing, chest pains, feeling like you're going to die. Is a struggle with anxiety, okay? And very similar to depression, there can be a lot of shame, guilt, and hopelessness, okay? So I'll now speak and just have one slide on how to take care of yourself, and then I'll speak to you about how to support others. So at the bare minimum, you don't want to make things worse for yourself, especially on the days or weeks that feel tougher. Okay, so that means that person in your life, maybe it's a relative, maybe it's a colleague, you want to try not to engage with people that are very difficult when you're struggling. You want to avoid movies, shows, even the news on those tough days, which can be traumatizing. So just be mindful, okay, of how is my mind and body today? And if you're like, this was one of the worst days or weeks, you don't want to watch that movie or show. And particularly the news, do not check these things first thing in the morning or last thing before bed. Now, if you're feeling really anxious, caffeine is a stimulant, so it's going to make things a lot worse. You want to avoid that. And alcohol is a depressant, so it can create more of that low, flat mood, and it can worsen depressive symptoms. So be mindful of that. Multitasking stresses our brain out. So especially during tough times, do one thing at a time. Just eat, just drive, just walk, just email, one thing at a time, and try not to overcommit and take too many things on during high stress times. And really be mindful of, how am I speaking to myself? So, for example, um, let's say you're feeling a wave of sadness or worry. If the inner response is, what's wrong with you? Why are you feeling so worried? You should be thankful that you have access to treatment, or you should be thankful that it's over now. Some people don't have access to care. If that is your response, which was judgmental, shaming, invalidating, that can actually make things worse for you. It's like someone yelling at you. That's the impact of it. So you want to avoid that and really try to speak to yourself the way you would someone that you deeply respect and love. If you find that you tend to be quite critical and shaming of yourself even before your cancer journey, that's really a flag. I'm not going to say red because that like maybe I will say red. This is like an orangish reddy flag of saying, okay, let's check in with the counselor to see what's going on. Okay. We're going to come back to that table. You want to practice essential self-care. So to the best of your ability, like if there's one I'll highlight, it will be, so the bare minimum, try not to make things worse for yourself. And you want to try and make sure for your treatment and just to endure and survive what's here, you want to sleep at least 7 straight hours. If you're not sleeping, you want to check in with a counselor, check in with a doctor. Sleep is such an active state that's restoring and rejuvenating and regulating our brain and our entire physical system. So be mindful of trying to sleep at least 7 hours. You want to make sure you're drinking 12 to 14 cups of water. We do see depressive-like symptoms with dehydration. Okay. Your gut health and your brain health are married. Okay. So you really want to make sure you're eating, whether that's a probiotic or colorful natural foods of the earth. Okay. You want to try and move at least 5,000 steps. Now, if you're in like that dorsal vagal freeze response where you're like, I'm not here, I'm not feeling anything, then you really want to do gentle movements, gentle shaking, long stretches, massage, bath, these movements where you're letting your nervous system know, I'm here, we're alive, you're safe. Okay, because the freeze response is the equivalent of the body saying, I'm so scared that if I just play dead, maybe this threat will go away. Okay, so you want gentle movement. And if you're feeling a lot more anxiety and activation, some cardio is going to help burn that cortisol, adrenaline as well. Okay, so just try moving a little bit more. Rest and sleep are very different. It's time where you're not being productive. And actually, play is just as essential as food, water, sleep, and movement. And play may be 10, 15, 30 minutes where you set aside your responsibilities and say, I'm going to doodle or play a board game or try to connect with something that feels lighter and playful for you. Okay? It's really I think it's something that we often forget about, especially as adults. Okay, so just start there. Don't make it worse for yourself. Sleep, water, food, movement, rest, play. Okay. Now, if you're saying, okay, I'm doing those things, I'm feeling pretty good. I've delegated some things, I'm avoiding certain things, I've delayed certain things, and sleep, water, food, movement, rest, then I will task you with this third column, which is hard for many of us. It's allowing yourself to feel. Now, we mapped out all of those emotions, right? And we're saying mental health is an essential aspect of cancer care and treatment that is often missing and ignored. And one tool, essential tool to tend to our mental health will be to allow yourself to feel. Now, for so many of us, we haven't learned how to do this. So we all have a different starting point. And if you're like, I don't do feelings, I don't know how to do feelings, no one ever showed me, taught me, then you want to start really small, right? Like 1 minute, 3 minutes of how am I really? Telling you to feel your feelings for 30 minutes or an hour when you have not done this is like going into the gym. You haven't went for years and picking up 200 pounds. You can actually hurt yourself. And by hurt yourself, you may throw yourself into a freeze, fight, flight response. Okay. So start creating some ventilation moments where you say, how am I really? You may want to try and identify what you're feeling. Is it angry, numb, exhausted? You want to name it, which is a strategy to feel feelings. Okay. You may do this with one or two people that you love, or you may do this, of course, with a counselor. Once you've said, okay, today I'm feeling okay, I'm feeling calm, I'm feeling curious. You're in that ventral vagal, right? That calm, open space. You're like, I'm listening to her, I feel curious. What can, now let's say you checked in and you were like, actually, I feel like numb, right? You want to acknowledge it by naming it. And then you want to search for soothing, not solutions. We don't solve feelings, we regulate or soothe them. So you may say, today in this hour, what may be helpful is I'm going to walk, sing, silence, connect with someone I love. It may be dance, it may be nature, it may be cocooning yourself on the sofa, it may be soft fabrics, it may be watching something that you really enjoy. It may be looking at these fractal patterns in nature, which we tend to see in trees and flowers. Gazing upon these things mindfully is one soothing strategy. Walking barefoot on the earth, maybe scents, shower, bath, candle. You may find deep breathing or conscious breathing, right? So deeply in through the nose, out through the mouth. Okay, we're soothing. Now, I'm not saying like go walk on the beach and like you won't feel sad anymore. It doesn't work that way. It says, I acknowledge I'm feeling sad. I acknowledge I'm feeling numb. And, walking or bathing is something that will be supportive for me in this hour. Okay. Compassionate touch. So hand on heart, hand on stomach. And one that can really be helpful, especially if you're like on your laptop a lot, we call this an orienting or grounding strategy, is you want to kind of orient yourself to the room. So I'll invite you to try this now. Take your eyes for a walk around your space. So you may look to the left. You want to look up, behind you, and below. And if you were sitting with me, I'd even say to you, is there an object around you that you're like, I really like looking at that? Like, it's just nice. Is it something outside your window? And I would invite you for a minute or two to just allow yourself to notice your environment. We're just kind of orienting because when we're feeling quite activated and afraid, we're not really present to what's happening right here and now. Okay. And remember, all these soothing strategies, pick and choose what resonates with you. If you're like, I don't like that, then you throw it in the garbage. But each one of us will soothe very differently. So you may also find shaking, tapping, which is highly evidence-based, and stretches. Okay. And I've already talked about this. Now I have two more slides on how can I support someone else? So at the bare minimum, you don't want to make things worse for that person. Less is more when it comes to supporting someone on this journey, when it comes to listening. Okay. So you don't want to say things like, man up, you shouldn't feel that way. You're being ungrateful, dramatic, or overly sensitive. It could be worse. or giving unsolicited advice and saying things like, you should really try seeing this person, or you should statements are judgments. You should really try doing this or that. If the person has not asked you for a suggestion, you don't want to offer unsolicited advice, okay? Now, unintended harm. Be compassionate to yourself. If you said these things, most people say these things. Do not say things like, you just need to, like, this is what you don't want to do. So I attended this talk today and you just need to sleep better. No, 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 no. Okay. Anything where you're saying just, we don't offer unsolicited advice. Don't say things like be strong. Remember, you can be feeling so strong and so scared. You can be feeling so hopeful and also hopeless. Okay. So just enduring and surviving is strength. Don't say any statements that begin with at least. That's not empathy. Don't say at least you're okay now, or at least you have a great doctor, at least you have resources, at least you have a job, at least you're not in pain, or at least they found it early. Not helpful. That's not empathy. Okay. If you ever try to find yourself like, I want you to feel better, or I want to change how you're thinking, you're taking too much responsibility. We call that an empathic fail. Okay. Don't say things like, it's over now. Just be thankful for what you have. It is what it is. Everything is going to be okay. Now, if I say to you, I'm feeling really scared today or sad, and you say everything's going to be okay, you're trying to make me feel better rather than saying you're going through a lot. That's really hard. It's more of a validating statement, right? It's saying, I hear what's here for you right now, and that's valid. Don't say things like, I know just how you feel. And if you too have been touched by cancer in some way and you're listening, um, we can never know exactly how someone feels. Usually the circumstances are very different. Okay. Don't say things like you just have to be strong for your team or your family or your kids. That's not helpful. Don't say, please don't cry. Let them cry if they're crying. Don't say you must stay positive to beat it. Right. And I find a lot of people put a lot of pressure on themselves to just be positive. We don't want to be toxically positive, right? That can actually create more pressure. For example, if I say, I am feeling hopeful and I'm also feeling really scared, and sometimes I just don't know what's going to happen, right? And if you're like, just don't think about those feelings, you're actually trying to repress them. And that can actually be harmful for our mental health, okay? Don't say things like everything happens for a reason, you shouldn't feel that way, other people have it worse, or saying nothing at all. Okay. It's not helpful. So let's look at some more helpful things you want to. And remember, you can't support someone else unless you actually have time and energy. So if you're like, I am not in a good place today, then that's okay. Don't have a deeper conversation. Now, if you do have the energy, you want to ask open-ended questions. How are you really? How have you been coping? I'm thinking of you. Would you feel comfortable sharing more about what this month has been like for you? What are you doing to take care of yourself? What can I do to support you? Every person in our life will need and feel supported in different ways, right? Someone may say, can you help me with an errand? Another person may say, can you come over or help me with a specific task? We really don't know what someone needs unless we ask them, okay? And you want to offer more validating statements, things like, if you'd like to share your experience, I'm here to listen. You can share as much or as little as you're comfortable with. I cannot imagine how difficult this must be for you. What you're feeling is completely valid. What you're experiencing matters to me. Thank you for opening up to me about what you've been going through. Wow, I don't even know what to say, but I'm so glad you told me, or thankful you told me. Please do not apologize for crying. It's okay. Thank you for being vulnerable with me. I'm thinking about you and what you've been going through. Okay. So we're offering more validation, and you really want to offer people choice and flexibility wherever you can, especially if they're going through treatment. They may not feel up to coming to an event or a celebration. And there may be other moments where they're like, well, I still want you to invite me, but today I don't want to come. So again, we don't want to make assumptions. Offer people choice and ask them. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing there. And I'm just going to take any, I feel like I spoke a lot to the hour, but any reflections, questions that you have, anything you'd like to share, we have a few minutes. So we have one comment. I have a very dear person going through this journey. I have lots of fear to lose her. I wonder if I should share with her the reality of her state or leave her to live day by day as she is suffering from stage 4 breast cancer. It has reached the lungs, non-curable, triple negative. So my biggest ethical dilemma is about if I should be open about her prognosis. That's really painful. Um, I think there's a few kind of, I guess, questions and reactions I have when I read that is how incredibly painful it is for you. So something I imagine you're already experiencing is what we call anticipatory loss, right? It is while the person is living, we start experiencing waves of grief, which can be all of those emotions I spoke about, like fear, numbness, anxiety, um, everything we mapped out can begin even before that person has actually potentially died. And for many of us, even if the person does not have terminal cancer, stage 4, we can start experiencing waves of anticipation. Like, what if I lose them? What would happen? And that can come in those waves. And so I want you to know that that's understandable. You're feeling that way, and you will need to take extra care of you as you experience these waves. Highly stressful, I think, and sad, right? And traumatic, actually. I'm a little bit unclear on when you say, should you be open about her prognosis? I imagine that the doctors and her team have been clear to her about what she's going through. And it's it's hard for me to advise you on whether you should speak to her about your fears because depending on where she's at in her journey, she may not have the capacity to hold space for that. It may be activating for her, it may be triggering. She may not be ready to talk about that. So I would say let her lead. If she opens the conversation and says, how are you feeling? Or what is this like for you? Then it may be a space, but um, yeah, she may not be the right person to hold that for you. Okay. Um, I hope that's helpful. And in my opinion, I think it's so important to be clear with people on the cancer journey. I think it's their right to know what's happening with their treatment, unless they've explicitly said, like, don't tell me anything. I think that honesty is really important so that they can get their affairs in order and say or do the things that they want or need to do. But that's really painful and it's really traumatic to go and I'd also say it's also quite loving to journey with someone to bear witness to the hardest part of their life, perhaps. So we have another question, which is I'm dealing with breast cancer treatment for the second time, 5 years apart. Any tips of fear of recurrence? So one is I need you to know that feeling that fear or having those waves of anxiety is absolutely understandable, right? It is absolutely understandable that there is a fear that is there because of the experiences you've had. And when difficult emotions like fear arrive, imagine they're like coming into an airport, our inner airport. You can't control that the fear is coming, right? So it doesn't mean you're like weak or strong or not like super resilient. The fear comes, our control or our responsibility is when I am feeling afraid that it may come back, what do I do in that moment? how do I regulate my nervous system that's feeling afraid? One is allow yourself to feel it. I'm feeling afraid, right? Allow yourself to feel it. So almost like we said, like going into that gym, 1 minute, 3 minutes, getting curious about what am I afraid of? Where do I feel it in my body? If this fear were an image or a weather forecast, what would it look like? So we're just meeting it. What is this pain? What is this fear trying to tell me? Right? We allow it to arrive. We meet it with compassion. So notice even the questions I'm asking, I'm not saying like, don't feel that way, don't think that, you shouldn't be afraid. That's invalidating. So we meet it, we feel it. It's scary. And then I would ask you, and this is the regulation, what can you do in this hour or on this day where the fear is present that would be soothing for your nervous system? So we honor the fear, and you may say, taking a walk today would help me feel safe. It may be checking in with a doctor. It may be food. It may be connection. It may be music. It may be silence. And this is where we'd want to build a robust awareness of what helps soothe you when you are also feeling afraid. And then if we're saying that in that fear, who arrived was anxiety, then you'd also say, I'm going to limit my caffeine. I'm going to add a bit more movement this week. I'm going to limit or not engage with any shows, movies that, or even individuals that can be quite activating, right? So those are some of the things that I would recommend. We have one more comment. Um, my father has been a cancer survivor for over 35 years, starting in his bladder, but unfortunately has moved to his kidney about 16 years ago. 2 years ago, we found out as a family his cancer has advanced to his lungs, making him stage 4, with a diagnosis of terminal cancer. He's an amazing person and exudes positivity and his belief in God, and has also accepted whatever may come. I, on the other hand, am having a difficult time accepting his time might be limited. He has defied most of his prognosis throughout the years, so I'm always hopeful, but realize I need to acknowledge the reality of the situation. We speak every day and always have lots to converse on aside from his sickness. I just fear my sudden sparks of anxiety or rush of worry sometimes can really be debilitating and even give me guilt and remorse, as I am far away from my parents. I journal, pray, breathe, meditate. How can I assist with managing these emotions more consistently? That's really hard. What you're going through is incredibly painful. And it sounds like you're managing in a very intentional, deliberate, conscious way. It sounds like you've been doing a lot of self-reflecting and there's a lot of self-awareness that you have. And mm, I don't know that you need different strategies because I'm hearing you're actually doing a lot of different things. I, as a grief counselor, have a complicated relationship with the word accept. We tend to think that if I accept this, then I won't feel these difficult feelings. Maybe it will hurt less. Maybe I will have moments where I feel more perfectly grounded. And I would say it doesn't quite work that way. I think I would replace the word acceptance. I need to accept this to I'm adjusting to this every day, every week. I don't think it's something that we can accept that someone we love, that your father may not live at some point, that it's unfathomable to imagine a day where you're not having those conversations about everything. Um, I think there can be adjustment. I don't know about acceptance. I have this image of acceptance, like people say, like you kind of chew on something and you swallow it, and it's like, okay, I know. It's like, how can you just like acceptance comes in moments, right? So I'd also say like there's moments where you may feel like, I know this is real, this is happening, it hurts, and another tool you're using is you're being present with him. Um, and it sounds like you are adjusted in some moments. And then comes the anticipatory loss, right? Which can come as a wave of debilitating fear, sadness, heaviness that's here. So when you looked at that self-care slide, I would say it's exceptionally important for you to, in those moments, not make things worse for yourself. Sleep, water, food, movement, rest. And you're doing a lot of soothing strategies. I would also add is have spaces where you let yourself feel the fear as well. And don't do it alone because, man, it's heavy, right? Is it maybe with a counselor and maybe with someone that you love as well? We're not trying to cure what you're feeling because in some ways it's absolutely understandable what you are feeling. Okay, so thank you everyone for, especially to those who shared, who showed up. You just kind of sat with these feelings for an hour, so you may be feeling a little bit tired, heavy, lighter, seen, maybe a cluster of things. So make sure you get up, get out of the space that you're in, and um, practice some type of soothing. Thank you for being here. Take care. Bye.